Encephalitis lethargica. In the early 20th century, a strange and terrifying illness swept the globe. It began like the flu, fever, sore throat, fatigue, but it quickly escalated into something far more disturbing. Patients slipped into a prolonged, dreamless sleep. Some awoke weeks or months later, unaware of how much time had passed. Others never regained consciousness. Doctors were baffled. This condition didn't match any known illness. It was eventually named encephalitis lethargica, meaning inflammation of the brain that causes lethargy. Between 1916 and the late 1920s, it affected more than 1 million people. But what made it truly horrifying wasn't just the coma-like states. It was what happened to those who survived. Many who woke up weren't the same. Some had extreme muscle rigidity, their bodies frozen in unnatural positions. Others suffered from tremors, uncontrolled movements, or difficulty speaking. A large number were left with symptoms similar to advanced Parkinson's disease. They were awake but trapped. Their minds were active, but their bodies wouldn't respond. These patients became known as living statues. Photographs from that time are haunting. People sit upright in beds or wheelchairs, eyes wide open, faces vacant. Families described them as present but unreachable, like their souls had left and only the body remained. The most well-known account comes from neurologist Oliver Sacks, who met a group of survivors in the 1960s. These patients had been frozen for decades. Sacks gave them a drug called L-Dopa, which briefly brought them back. Some laughed, some danced, but the effect didn't last. The symptoms returned. One by one, they fell back into silence, as if their time awake had only been borrowed. The cause of encephalitis lethargica remains a mystery. One theory connects it to the 1918 Spanish flu, suggesting a mutated virus triggered the condition. Another proposes an autoimmune reaction, where the body, after fighting off infection, turns on the brain instead. Despite modern medicine, no definitive cause has ever been found, and maybe more unsettling than its cause is its disappearance. After the 1920s, the epidemic faded. Cases became rare, then nearly non-existent. It was as if the disease had served its purpose and vanished. But a few isolated cases have appeared since with eerily similar symptoms. No one knows why. A disease that locks people between life and silence, that stumps even top neurologists, that disappeared without explanation. Encephalitis lethargica remains one of the most disturbing medical mysteries of the 20th century, and the idea that it could return at any moment for reasons we still don't understand is something most people would rather not think about. Stoneman syndrome. FOP, more commonly known as Stoneman syndrome, is one of the rarest and most terrifying genetic disorders in existence. It turns the human body against itself in a slow, irreversible process. Muscles, tendons, and connective tissue, things that are supposed to be soft and flexible, gradually transform into bone. Over time, the body forms a second skeleton, one that locks the person inside of it. The process often begins in early childhood. A bump or fall that would cause a normal bruise instead triggers a flare-up, leading to rapid bone growth in places where bone should never form. The jaw may lock, the spine may stiffen. Limbs slowly lose their ability to bend. Once bone has formed in a certain part of the body, it can't be removed. Any attempt at surgery only makes it worse because the trauma causes more bone to grow in response. There are fewer than 1,000 confirmed cases worldwide. There's no cure. There's not even a treatment to stop or slow it. Eventually, most people with FOP lose the ability to walk, eat normally, or even breathe comfortably. In the late stages, their rib cages become so rigid that it becomes difficult for their lungs to expand. And yet, their minds remain completely intact. That's perhaps the most disturbing part. These individuals are fully conscious, completely aware, as their bodies become prisons. They aren't losing brain function. They're not fading away. They're watching it happen in real time, day by day, unable to stop it. Researchers discovered that the condition is caused by a single genetic mutation in the ACVR1 gene. This gene controls how the body responds to injuries, specifically how it grows and repairs bone. In those with FOP, the body misreads trauma as a signal to create bone, even when none is needed. There's no preventative surgery, no medicine. Even small procedures like vaccinations can trigger a permanent flare-up. Something as simple as tripping and falling can lead to a lifetime of disability. The only real defense is to avoid injury entirely, and that's almost impossible. The slow transformation is deeply symbolic. It's the human body fossilizing itself while still alive. And the name Stoneman Syndrome isn't an exaggeration. By the end, some patients are quite literally encased in bone, frozen in place like statues. To live with this condition is to feel yourself being buried, without ever leaving your skin. Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Lesch-Nyhan syndrome is rare, genetic, and almost too disturbing to believe. It affects young boys almost exclusively and reveals itself in early childhood, often beginning with developmental delays. But the true horror of this disorder doesn't appear until later, when the self-destructive behavior begins. Children with Lesch-Nyhan syndrome begin to bite themselves, not out of frustration or confusion, but as a compulsion they cannot stop. They'll bite their lips, tongues, cheeks, anything they can reach. Many end up with serious facial injuries, missing teeth, and open wounds. Some even have to have their teeth removed entirely to prevent further harm. But it doesn't end there. The self-harm often extends to the hands and fingers. Patients may bang their heads against objects, claw at their skin, or hit themselves without warning. And here's the most terrifying part. Most of them are aware of what they're doing. They'll say they don't want to hurt themselves, but they can't stop. It's as if something else has taken control of their body. The cause is a mutation in the HPRT1 gene, which leads to a buildup of uric acid in the body. This creates a cascade of issues: gout-like symptoms, kidney stones, and neurological damage. But self-injury isn't fully understood. It seems to be tied to dysfunction in the basal ganglia, the same part of the brain affected by other movement disorders. Except this one manifests as something darker. There is no cure. Medication can reduce uric acid levels, but it doesn't stop the neurological symptoms. Even powerful psychiatric drugs often have little effect on compulsive self-harm. Many patients require restraints to prevent injury. Some are placed in helmets or padded environments just to survive day to day. Unlike some disorders where cognitive function is impaired, many Lesch-Nyhan patients have average intelligence. They understand what's happening to them. They know their bodies are turning against them. And that knowledge, combined with the inability to stop it, is where the real horror lies. It's not a condition that progresses quickly. It makes the body its own worst enemy, and it leaves families with the impossible task of protecting their children from themselves. Hyperthymesia. On the surface, it sounds like a gift. The ability to remember every single day of your life in vivid, exact detail. What you ate, what you wore, what the weather was like on a random Tuesday 10 years ago. Hyperthymesia is extremely rare, and only a handful of confirmed cases exist. But for those who live with it, it's not a superpower, it's a burden. People with hyperthymesia don't just remember key events. Their memories operate like a constantly running film reel. When they hear a date, they're instantly transported to that moment, complete with the emotions, sensations, and thoughts they had at the time. It's not a vague recollection, it's a full-body return. Everything comes back, whether they want it to or not. One of the most well-known cases is a woman named Jill Price. She described her memory as automatic and unrelenting. She couldn't stop remembering. Even the smallest triggers could send her spiraling into a flood of past experiences. If something painful happened, she would relive it over and over, not in reflection, but as if it were happening again. That's what makes hyperthymesia so unsettling. There's no forgetting, no softening of sharp memories, no emotional distance. Traumatic events don't fade. Embarrassing moments never blur. Every mistake, every loss, every regret stays sharp and alive. Researchers believe it may be linked to differences in the structure of the brain, particularly areas tied to memory, emotion, and obsessive behavior. Some have drawn connections between hyperthymesia and certain forms of OCD. Others think it could be related to unusual activity in the amygdala and hippocampus, which control emotional memory. But the strangest part is how specific it is. These individuals don't have photographic memory. They can't recall random facts or memorize books. Their memory is tied specifically to their own lives, as if the brain is prioritizing personal narrative over everything else. You start to wonder what that says about identity. If you remembered every detail of your past exactly as it happened, would you still be the same person? Or would you be stuck in who you were, unable to grow beyond it? For most people, forgetting is a part of healing. The brain chooses what to let go of, what to file away, and what to bury. But for those with hyperthymesia, the past is always present. Time moves forward, but nothing is ever truly behind them. And eventually, that kind of memory becomes a trap. It's not about nostalgia, it's about being haunted by your own mind, and the thought that your worst days will live with you forever, unfiltered and unchanging, is a kind of psychological weight most of us couldn't bear. Morgellons disease. It starts with a sensation, like something crawling just beneath the surface of the skin. Patients describe it as itching, burning, or stinging. Some say it feels like tiny bugs moving under their flesh. Then come the fibers, strange thread-like materials emerging from open sores. They can be black, blue, red, or translucent. Sometimes they appear embedded deep in the skin. Other times they seem to grow out of it. This is Morgellons disease, a condition so bizarre that it's often dismissed by the medical community as a psychological issue, a delusion. But not everyone agrees. Some researchers have studied these fibers and found that they don't match known contaminants. In some cases, they're made of cellulose. Others don't burn like natural or synthetic materials. They just melt. Patients collect and store samples, desperate to prove what they're experiencing is real. There are thousands of reported cases, mostly in the United States. The CDC even launched an investigation in 2006. Their findings were inconclusive. They couldn't find a clear cause or pattern. Officially, they suggested the symptoms were psychological, but for the people suffering, that explanation doesn't hold up. The wounds are real, the fibers are real, the pain is real. Being told it's imaginary only makes it worse. And it's not just skin symptoms. Many report fatigue, joint pain, and cognitive issues, what some call brain fog. A few even claim to have pulled small bits of plastic, metal, or crystal-like particles from their skin. These more extreme reports are often ignored, but the fact remains, the cause of Morgellons has never been identified. Some believe it's triggered by environmental factors, chemical exposure, genetically modified organisms, or unknown pathogens. Others go further, suggesting a connection to nanotechnology or secret experiments. These theories aren't mainstream, but with no concrete answers, they continue to spread. The disease gained more attention when musician Joni Mitchell revealed she had it. She called it a slow, unpredictable nightmare. Her statement helped legitimize the illness for many, but it also increased scrutiny. At its core, Morgellons is terrifying because it sits between belief and science. The symptoms are physical, but explanations are elusive. If it's all in the mind, how do you explain the fibers? If it's physical, why can't anyone figure it out? Morgellons live in that gray zone, half dismissed, half believed, but fully disturbing. Whether it's a strange disorder, an environmental reaction, or something we don't yet understand, one thing is clear. The people experiencing it aren't imagining things, and the more you look into it, the more it starts to feel like something we were never meant to find. Ribose 5-phosphate isomerase deficiency. There are rare diseases, and then there's this. Ribose 5-phosphate isomerase deficiency is one of the rarest genetic disorders ever recorded. Fewer than 10 confirmed cases exist worldwide. It's so rare that most doctors have never even heard of it. It's caused by a mutation in the RPIA gene. This gene plays a role in how the body processes sugars to create energy. When that process breaks down, the effects are immediate and severe. Symptoms usually appear in infancy: developmental delays, muscle weakness, seizures. As time passes, the condition worsens. The brain begins to shrink, structures break down. Many patients are left with profound disability. It is a slow decline with no way to stop it. What makes this condition even more haunting is how little we know. There's almost no research, no funding, no treatment protocols, just a handful of case studies scattered across obscure journals. With so few cases, doctors don't know how long patients might live. Some children passed within a few years. Others lived longer but faced extreme challenges. They could not walk, speak, or eat on their own. Most babies with this disorder appear healthy at birth. There's no warning. But hidden in their DNA is a single mutation that starts a quiet collapse. By the time symptoms appear, damage is already happening. Because it's so rare, there are no charities or awareness campaigns, no support groups. It exists in total obscurity. And yet, for the families affected, it becomes their entire world. It's a condition that unbuilds a person from the inside. One mutation, one flaw, and life as they know it is rewritten. It makes you wonder how many other conditions like this are out there, still unnamed, still hiding, waiting to reveal themselves when it's already too late.